Hi Reddit. I've been thinking for a long time whether it's even worth writing about this. But when you're holding your child in your arms and hear your parents, the ones who cut you out of their lives, suddenly asking for a second chance, something inside you breaks, and you don't know if you're a monster or just a person who's tired of being hurt. But it all started much earlier. From the day they essentially erased me. I was 20 years old. I was living in a small town near Leeds in England. An ordinary middle-class family, dad an accountant, mom a school teacher, older sister Emma the golden child. Everything in our family always revolved around the perfect image, Dad often said. The Sanders family should be an example for others. I didn't really think about what that meant until I started growing up. When I went to university, I felt for the first time that I could be myself. I started dating a girl. Her name was Sophie. She was incredible, kind, free-spirited, smart, with an infectious laugh. But according to my parents, she had the wrong background. Her dad owned a small pub. Her mom worked as a hairdresser. My parents thought I should date someone from a family with a future. Funny, right? They talked about level like it was a commodity. I still remember the first conversation about it. I came home for the weekend, and Mom greeted me with an icy smile. "We talked with your father. We think Sophie isn't right for you." "Why?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Because she's not from our circle. She has no future. You do, don't ruin it over an infatuation." I stayed silent, because at that moment I realized they didn't see me as a person. Just a project, and any deviation from their script was an error that needed fixing. From that day, the relationship started cracking. I still called them, tried to explain that I loved Sophie, that we were serious, but their responses grew colder. Dad said, "You're making the biggest mistake of your life. When you realize it, it'll be too late." I thought it was just emotions, but then something happened that I'll remember forever. It was December, a cold, damp day. I came home before Christmas with a ring in my pocket. I was going to tell my parents that I'd proposed to Sophie. I didn't even get a chance to open my mouth. They already knew. Someone from their acquaintances saw us in the cafe where I proposed and kindly informed Dad. When I walked into the house, the atmosphere was like before a storm. Mom stood by the fireplace, her face frozen. Dad at the table with an envelope in his hands. "We know everything," he said, "and if you're really going to insist on this." He placed the envelope in front of me. "Then you no longer have a place in this family." I opened it. Inside was a letter, official. Legally precise. "We, the undersigned, refuse financial support for our son," and so on. I didn't immediately grasp the meaning. They weren't just arguing, they were literally disowning me. "Are you serious?" I asked. "Is this a joke?" Mom turned away. Dad said quietly but coldly, "You made your choice." "I chose love, Dad." "No, you chose weakness." I left the house in the snow, with that envelope in my hands. It was like a shot in the back. I walked down the street and felt neither the cold nor the pain, just emptiness. Everything inside burned out. I never went back there again. Sophie met me at the station. I tried to smile but couldn't. I just handed her the envelope. She read it and cried. "I'm sorry," she said. "This is because of me." "No," I replied. "This is because of them." That night we slept in each other's arms as if our lives depended on it. And maybe they did. Because at that moment I realized, family isn't those who give birth to you. It's those who stay when others turn away. The following years were tough. I dropped out of university because my parents refused to pay for tuition, and I couldn't get a loan. I worked wherever I could, on construction sites, in stores, as a delivery guy. Sophie was always there. She didn't complain, didn't judge. Sometimes I'd wake up at night and think, is it all worth it? but then I'd see her smiling in her sleep and know, yes, it is. Gradually, life started to improve. I began working at a small IT company, studied in the evenings, got certifications, rose to project manager. We rented an apartment in Manchester, then bought a small house. And then, 5 years after that conversation with my parents, Sophie said the phrase that changed everything. I'm pregnant. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, coffee mug in hand, and just froze. I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or fall to my knees. She came over, placed my hand on her belly, still flat, but now with new meaning, and said, "We're going to have a family, a real one." I remember how we laughed, cried, made plans, chose names. But deep down, I still felt a shadow. Somewhere out there, in the house near Leeds, lived people who didn't even know they were becoming grandparents. And I didn't know how I felt about that, anger or sadness. In the 7th month of pregnancy, Sophie suggested, "Maybe you should write to them, at least, just let them know." I was silent for a long time, then said, "If they want to know, they'll find a way." She nodded, didn't insist. But I saw the unspoken question in her eyes. Will you ever be able to forgive them? 3 months passed. And then the birth. Night, snow outside the window, the same cold December, but this time, a different feeling. I held my son in my arms, a little bundle that cried as if declaring to the world, I'm alive. Sophie smiled, tired but happy. I kissed her and said, "We did it, we're a family." And at that moment, I felt like that old pain had dissolved, as if I'd finally been set free. But I was wrong. 3 days after discharge, Sophie brought the phone. "You should see this." On the screen, a Facebook notification. A friend request from my mother. I froze. 5 years. 5 years of silence, no calls, no letters. And now a request, no text, just the add friend button. I didn't accept it, but something inside me stirred. And the next day, a message came. 3 words. "We want to see our grandson." I reread the phrase probably 20 times. My hands were shaking. Images flashed before my eyes. The envelope with that letter, Dad at the table, the cold in his voice, how they disowned me. And now we want to see. I didn't reply. But that night I couldn't sleep. Sophie asked, "You know they'll find a way if they decide to come." "I know," I said, "but now everything's different." She looked at me closely. "What do you feel?" I thought about it. I don't know, probably emptiness and a bit of fear. I thought it was just a coincidence. But no, it was only the beginning. Because a week later, my dad called. I always thought the past stays behind if you don't look back. But the truth is, it just waits for the moment when you become vulnerable. When you have something you could lose. After I got that message from Mom, "We want to see our grandson," I spent several days just going in circles. Couldn't focus. Every phone sound made my heart beat faster. But neither Sophie nor my son should see that I was broken. We had just started living a new life. A small house, the smell of milk, the quiet of nights occasionally interrupted by a baby's cry and me getting up to rock him back to sleep. I didn't even know I was capable of loving someone so much. Every breath, every gesture seemed like a miracle. And every time I held my son, I felt one thing. You'll never know what it means to be rejected. But when the phone rang and Dad flashed on the screen, the past burst into the house like a draft. I didn't answer right away. 3 rings, 4, 5. Sophie stood nearby, looking at me. I pressed accept. "Hello," Dad's voice was strangely weak. "Hello. It's me." "I know," I replied coldly. 5 years haven't passed unnoticed." He paused. We heard you had a son. Congratulations. Thanks. We'd like to see him. I almost laughed. After you cut me out. We made a mistake, he said quietly. We were stubborn, we thought we knew best. My chest tightened. You didn't just make a mistake, Dad, you disowned me. Legally, remember, you signed the paper. Yes, I remember. Well, so do I. Silence. And then he said, people change. But not you, I said and hung up. Sophie came over, hugged me. It's okay, she whispered. You don't owe them or the past anything. But why now? I asked. Why exactly now when everything's finally good? She didn't answer, but I saw worry in her eyes. And to be honest, I was scared too, not for myself, but for the family I'd just started building. A week passed. Sophie and I tried to return to normal life. Walks with the stroller along the embankment, evening talks, rare moments of sleep. I started working again, remotely, a couple of hours a day. And I almost convinced myself that the call was just a flash from the past that would quickly fade. But one morning, when I was taking out the trash, I saw them. They were standing at the gate. Mom and Dad. The same ones I hadn't seen in 5 years. I froze. Mom looked older, wrinkles graying hair, eyes reddened. Dad seemed smaller, as if life had drained out of him. They held a gift, a plush teddy bear and a bouquet of roses. Don't be angry, Mom said quietly. We just wanted to see you. I didn't answer. I felt everything inside compressing. As if those years I'd spent stitching up wounds were suddenly for nothing. Leave, I said calmly. I don't want to talk to you. We can't just leave like that, Dad interjected. You're our son. Was, I replied, until you decided I was a disgrace to the family. Mom cried. We were wrong, she said. We were scared we'd lose you if we accepted your choice. You lost me anyway. I closed the gate. I heard her whisper through tears. Please, at least show us our grandson. I didn't turn around. That evening, I told Sophie everything. She was silent for a long time. Then asked, and what do you feel? Nothing, I replied. Absolutely nothing. That's not true. Maybe, I just don't know what to feel. She sighed. I'm not going to force you to forgive, but you need to be sure you're doing this not out of anger but out of protection. It's the same thing, I said. I'm protecting us because I don't want to end up in that house again, where love has to be earned. A few more days passed. I thought they'd back off, but no. Letters, messages, even a Christmas card signed, with love, Mom and Dad. Each time I tore up the envelope and threw it away, but my hands shook. Because, no matter how much I wanted to, part of me still waited for them to truly apologize. To say, we're proud of you no matter what. But they never did. In February, I got a letter. Not a message, not a call, a real letter by mail. Mom's handwriting. Son, if you're reading this, it means you're still angry. We're not asking you to forgive us. We just want to see the baby before it's too late. Dad is sick. Very. I reread it 3 times. I didn't know if to believe it. They always knew how to play on pity. But if it's true... Sophie looked at me when I told her. You have to decide for yourself, she said. But if you go, I'll go with you. I agreed to meet. Not because I forgave, just wanted to hear the truth. We went to Leeds, to the same house they'd kicked me out of. It hadn't changed much, just peeling paint and a withered garden. When I entered, the smell of childhood hit my memory. Tea, polish, the ticking of old clocks. Dad sat in an armchair, truly pale and gaunt. Mom served us tea. The silence dragged on painfully long. Then he said, I don't want to die without seeing my grandson. I was silent. Is this manipulation or a request? I finally asked. It's desperation, he replied. I understand I deserve your hatred, but please, give me a chance. I looked at Sophie. She held my hand. We have a son, I said quietly. His name is Jamie. Mom smiled through tears. A beautiful name. Yes, I replied. We chose it because it means one who is protected by God. They fell silent. I saw Mom's lips trembling. We're truly sorry, she said. Every day we were foolish. Pride destroyed us. I wanted to believe. Part of me even wanted to hug them. But another part remembered everything, every phrase, every look when I stood in the snow with that damned envelope. When we left the house, Sophie said, "What do you think?" "I don't know," I replied. They spoke sincerely, but it doesn't erase the past. That evening, Mom messaged, "Can we at least see a photo of Jamie? We won't insist on anything else." I stared at the screen for a long time. In the end, I just closed the chat. Didn't reply. The following weeks were torment. On one side, guilt. They're aging sick, asking for so little. On the other, memory, pain, cold betrayal. I wrote and deleted dozens of messages. "You can see him. I forgive you. Don't come near us." Didn't send any. And then a scene happened that changed everything. Sophie and I were walking in the park. Jamie was asleep in the stroller. Suddenly, she tensed. I turned and saw Mom. She stood a few meters away, just looking. In her hands, the same plush teddy bear. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "Please," she whispered. "I just wanted to see, even from afar." Sophie stepped forward, gently but firmly. "You need to leave. This isn't the place or time." Mom nodded, lowered her head, and left. I stood, unable to move. My heart pounded. And then I realized there's no such thing as from afar. The past always wants to come closer. That night, I didn't sleep again. I watched Jamie sleep in his crib and thought, if they'd done things differently back then, could I be a different person now? Softer, kinder. But then I remembered their faces that day, their coldness, their signatures on that letter, and realized, no. Because sometimes, to build a new life, you have to close the old one forever. A few weeks passed after that day in the park. Mom didn't show up anymore. No letters, calls stopped. I finally started breathing easy. But calm is a tricky thing. It always precedes the storm. In spring, Sophie returned from maternity leave. She taught at a nearby primary school. I continued working from home, and our son grew before our eyes. First words, first steps, first smile that seemed able to heal the whole world. We lived an ordinary, quiet, happy life. Until the letter arrived. It looked official. Envelope with no return address. Inside, a form with the crest of a law firm from Leeds. When I opened it, my hands shook. "Mr. James Hudson, you are notified of the serious condition of your father, Mr. Harold Hudson. He is in St. Luke's Hospital. Due to his condition, the family requests notification of closest relatives." I reread it 3 times. Hospital, closest relatives. Me. Sophie noticed how I paled. "What's wrong?" "Dad," my voice trembled. "He's in the hospital." She came over, hugged me. "Do you want to go?" "I don't know. You have to decide for yourself, but," she looked at me closely, "if you don't go, you might regret it later." I nodded. And that same evening, I was on the train to Leeds. The hospital greeted me with the smell of antiseptic and the sounds of IV drips. In the ward, Dad looked like a shadow of himself, gaunt, pale, hooked up to oxygen. Mom sat nearby. When I entered, she cried out, "Jamie, you came." I nodded. "I came to make sure it's true." Dad slowly opened his eyes. "Son." I didn't answer. I don't want to die without telling you the main thing, he rasped. I was wrong. All my life I thought I was raising you right, but I was mistaken. Words stuck in my throat. I didn't know how to react. He continued. When you said you wanted to marry Sophie, I thought you were ruining your life, but in reality, I was ruining my soul. You were ruining mine, I replied quietly. Mom cried. Dad closed his eyes. I'm not asking for forgiveness if you're not ready, just know, I'm proud of you. Those words hit harder than any accusation. Because I'd waited for them my whole life. A week later, he was gone. Mom called late at night. I listened silently as she sobbed. Then simply said, I'll come to the funeral, but not for him, for myself. At the funeral, I stood a bit aside. Sophie couldn't come. Our son was sick, a mild cold. Mom approached, clutching a black handkerchief. Thank you for coming. It's a duty, I replied, not a gesture of kindness. She nodded. I understand. After the ceremony, we stood by the grave. Mom looked at me. Will you let me see my grandson? No. Why? Pain trembled in her voice. I've lost everything, my husband, my son. You lost your son when you kicked me out. I turned and left without looking back. At home, Sophie asked. How was it? Peaceful, I replied, and scary. Why scary? Because I feel nothing. No anger, no sadness, just emptiness. She placed her hand on my shoulder. Sometimes emptiness isn't the absence of feelings. It's the place where wounds heal. A month passed. We returned to normal life again. Sophie worked, Jamie grew, and I thought I'd finally put a period. But the past, as it turned out, wasn't done with me. One day, I got a letter from a notary. In accordance with the last will of Mr. Harold Hudson, you are named heir to his property and financial assets. I almost dropped the envelope. They had disowned me. Legally. Dad changed the will before he died. I went to the office. The lawyer, a gray-haired man with a polite smile, handed over the papers. Yes, Mr. Hudson, everything is properly executed. Your father left you the house, savings, and insurance account. And Mom, I asked. To her, a lifetime annuity, but the main property to you. I didn't know what to say. They cut me out, and then he gave it all back. And now I couldn't understand. Was this redemption or another form of control? When I told Sophie, she was silent. Then said, You don't have to accept. But if I don't, it'll go to the bank. Sometimes peace is worth more than money. I sat at the table and stared at the papers. At Dad's signature, at the date, a week before his death. At the bottom, a handwritten note. Maybe I don't deserve forgiveness, but perhaps you deserve justice. A few days later, I went back to Leeds. The house was empty. Mom had moved to my aunt's. I wandered through the rooms where I'd once grown up. Every corner held memories, the smell of paint, marks from furniture, an old family photo forgotten on the shelf. And then I realized, a house isn't walls, it's where you're loved. Which means this house was never mine. I left the keys on the table and walked out. Mom called that evening. I heard you were at the house. Yes. And now what? Nothing, sell it or live there. And the will? I don't need anything. She fell silent. He would be proud of you, she said quietly. Maybe, but I wish he'd said it while alive. A few weeks later, I got another message. Mom wrote, Jamie, I don't want war anymore. If you'll allow, I'd like to meet my grandson. Once. No scenes, no pressure, just to see. I showed the message to Sophie. She was silent for a long time, then said, I don't know what to advise you. Me neither. We went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. In my head, her voice echoed. Not the cold one from when they kicked me out, but a new one, tired, broken. The next day, I wrote to her. Okay once, but not at home, in the park, in public. She replied almost immediately. Thank you, son. We met a week later, on a bench by the lake. Sophie held Jamie, Mom sat opposite. She was trembling, as if afraid to touch. He's beautiful, she whispered. Yes, I replied. He has your eyes. And Sophie's too, I added, trying to ease the tension. Mom smiled through tears. I don't deserve this. I know, I said, but he deserves to know that even bad stories can have an end. She cried. Thank you. Don't thank me, just don't come back without warning. When she left, Sophie looked at me. You did the right thing. I'm not sure. No, she said softly, you put a period. That night I couldn't sleep for a long time. I listened to my son's breathing, looking at his face, and thought, maybe that's the point, not to seek revenge, not to forget, but just not to repeat. The past returned, but for the first time in years I wasn't afraid of it. I'm no longer that boy who was kicked out of the house. I'm a father who will never do the same to his son. 3 months passed after the meeting in the park. Life settled back into routine. Morning coffee, walks with Jamie, evenings with Sophie, occasional calls from colleagues. Each day I thought less about Mom, about the past, about the pain. But as it turned out, the past never leaves quietly. It returns, not loudly, not threateningly, but almost in a whisper. And that whisper came in the form of a letter. The handwriting was the same, uneven, with a slight slant. Dear Jamie, I don't want to bother you or interfere. I just wanted to say that you've made my grandson a miracle. I saw in him a light I haven't seen in myself for many years. I'm sick. It's not something serious, but the doctors say I should be near family. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know I'm no longer hiding behind pride. If you ever want to talk, I'll be here. Mom. I reread that letter probably 20 times. And for the first time in many years, I didn't feel anger. Just fatigue. That same fatigue when the heart no longer wants to fight. Sophie noticed I was restless. Another letter, she asked in the evening as I twirled the envelope in my hands. Yes. From her. What does she want? Says she's sick, asks, not to forgive, just to talk. She sighed silently and said, and do you want to? I was silent for a long time. I watched Jamie sleep in his crib, clutching his toy bear. I don't know, I finally replied. Part of me wants to put an end. Another fears reopening old wounds. Sometimes an end is the way to heal a wound, she said, but decide for yourself. I hesitated for a week. The letter lay on the table like an anchor. Every time I passed by, I felt like it was pulling me back to the past I'd so carefully buried. But one morning, as the sun filtered through the curtains, I just picked up the phone and dialed her number. Hello, her voice was hoarse, old. It's me. A long pause. Jamie. I heard her sob. I thought you'd never call. Me too, I replied, but here I am. Thank you, you have no idea how much this means. We agreed to meet in 2 days, in the same park where it all started. I didn't know what to expect. Panic, remorse, more excuses. But when I saw her, I felt nothing but pity. She'd aged. Gray hair, dark circles under her eyes, thin arms. This wasn't the woman who once said with an icy face, "You're no longer our son." This was just a mother, broken, lonely, tired. She smiled. Thank you for coming. I'm not sure this is a good idea. Me neither, but I wanted to try. We sat on the same bench. Families passed by, children laughed, the air smelled of spring. No one knew that right here, on this bench, Forgiveness was happening that no one had asked for. After the funeral, I didn't know why to live for a long time, she began. Your father, despite everything, he loved you. He just didn't know how to show it. Neither of us did. We were taught to be proper, not weak. And you were always different, more real. I was silent. Words stuck somewhere between heart and mind. She continued. When you left, I thought time would fix everything. But then I realized I was just waiting for the moment when I could stop lying to myself. And now, seeing you, she looked at me, I see you've become what I always wanted you to be, strong. I couldn't hold back. Strong after what you did. You kicked me out when I needed you most. You judged me for love, my voice trembled. You decided your opinion was worth more than my happiness. She cried. I know. No, you don't. You lived with it like a shadow. I lived with it like a wound. A long silence. Birds chirped overhead. I'm not asking you to forget, she said finally. I just want you to allow yourself not to hate, because hate, it destroys not the one who's guilty, but the one who remembers. Those words stuck in me. I didn't know if I'd forgiven her. But for the first time in many years, I allowed myself to listen. We sat for a long time. She told me how she lives with my aunt, how she misses Dad, how sometimes she dreams of that boy who laughed in the backyard. I listened, not because I wanted to, but because I understood. This might be the last thing I hear from her. When we said goodbye, she asked, Can I see Jamie again, someday? I looked into her eyes and said, Someday, yes, but not today. She nodded. I'll wait. A few weeks passed. I didn't know whether to write to her. But one evening, as I was putting my son to bed, he suddenly said, Dad, why don't I have a grandma? Sophie raised her eyebrows. Where did you get that from? Tom has a grandma, and Emma does, but I don't. I froze. How do you explain to a 3-year-old that the world isn't always black and white? I sat beside him. You do have a grandma, I said quietly. She just lives far away. Does she love me? I think so. He smiled. Then I want to draw her a picture. He ran to the table, grabbed crayons, and started drawing a sun, a house, and 3 people holding hands. I watched him, and suddenly realized how simple everything looks through a child's eyes. A couple of days later, I found that drawing on the table. And I don't know why, but I put it in an envelope and mailed it. No letter, no signature, just the drawing. A week later, a reply came. The envelope in the same neat handwriting. Inside, a photo, Mom holding that same drawing. And a short note. I cried, thank you, it's now hanging on my wall. Sophie smiled when she saw it. So you forgave after all. I shrugged. I don't know, maybe I'm just tired of holding a grudge. She hugged me. Sometimes forgiveness isn't for them, it's for you. A year passed. Mom wrote from time to time, short, warm letters. No pressure, no attempts to impose. Sometimes I replied, sometimes not. But one day, we invited her to Jamie's birthday. When she entered the house, I saw how nervous she was. Sophie greeted her with a smile. Jamie ran up and handed her his new drawing. She burst into tears. And I suddenly realized it doesn't hurt anymore. Later, when the guests left, we stood on the balcony. Mom looked at me and said, Thank you for letting me be part of this. Thank you for coming, I replied. A pause. I often think about that day when I told you you're no longer our son, she said quietly. It was the stupidest and cruelest thing I've ever done. I sighed. And I often think about the day I said, I don't want to know you anymore. We're both guilty. She nodded. Yes, but it seems now we're both moving on. When she left, I went outside, breathed in the night air, and looked at the windows of our house. where Sophie was putting our son to bed. I felt peace. Real quiet, long awaited. As I went back inside, words I'd once said to myself echoed in my head. I won't let the past destroy my future. And for the first time in all this time, I realized I kept that promise. Sometimes I reread my old Reddit post, the one where I asked AITA if I didn't let my parents see my newborn after they disowned me. Now I know the answer. No, I wasn't the AH. I was a person who learned to forgive. And maybe that's the only inheritance worth passing on.